Did you know that in medieval England, what you wore could get you into serious trouble? It wasn't just about fashion, it was about the law. Today, we're diving into the strange and fascinating world of medieval sumptuary laws. Imagine this. You're walking down a street in 14th century London. You see a merchant wearing a luxurious purple silk robe. Well, get ready for some drama, because he could be fined or even have that robe confiscated. Why? Because certain colors, fabrics, and styles were strictly reserved for specific social classes. These weren't just fashion faux pas. They were illegal. These laws were called sumptuary laws, from the Latin word for expenditure. Their goal was to control what people bought and wore, essentially freezing the social hierarchy in place. The nobles wanted to make sure you could tell a duke from a baker just by looking at them. It was all about maintaining order and preventing the lower classes from getting too ambitious. So what exactly was forbidden? Start with the most coveted color, purple. Tyrian purple dye was incredibly expensive, made from thousands of tiny sea snails. It was the ultimate status symbol. According to a law from 1363, under King Edward III, only the king, queen, and their immediate family could wear purple cloth. If you were a knight or a wealthy merchant and you tried to rock a purple cape, you were breaking the law. It was the medieval equivalent of wearing a crown you didn't earn. Then there was the fabric. Cloth of gold and silver, strictly for the highest nobility dukes, marquises, and earls. Even lesser nobles had restrictions. A knight, for example, could wear velvet, but only certain types. And if you were a commoner, a farmer, or a craftsman, forget it. You were stuck with wool, linen, and canvas, usually in dull, earthy colors like brown, gray, and undyed beige. Your clothes had to be practical, durable, and most importantly, cheap. It wasn't just about color and fabric, though. The style and cut of your clothes were also regulated. One of my favorite examples is the pointy shoes, called crocauds or poulaines. These shoes became incredibly fashionable among young men, and the points just kept getting longer and longer. It got so ridiculous that some men had to tie the tips of their shoes to their knees just to walk around. The authorities saw this as a sign of vanity and moral decay. So, they passed laws limiting the length of the shoe tips. For a lord, the points could be longer, but for a commoner, they were supposed to be no more than 6 inches. Imagine getting a ticket for having shoes that are too pointy. Even fur was a big deal. Ermine, that beautiful white fur with black spots from a stoat, was reserved for royalty and the highest-ranking nobles. It was used to line their robes and symbolize purity and power. If you were a merchant's wife, you might be allowed to wear fox or otter fur, but definitely not ermine. It was a clear visual signal of who was at the top of the food chain. You might be wondering, did people actually follow these laws? Well, yes and no. The rich and powerful certainly enforced them when it suited them. Fines were a great way to make money, and confiscating expensive clothes was a bonus. But human nature is what it is. Ambitious merchants and their families often pushed the boundaries. They had to wear a fabric that was asterisk, almost asterisk forbidden, or a color that was asterisk, close asterisk to the restricted shade. It was a constant cat-and-mouse game with the authorities. Fashion, even back then, was a form of rebellion. These laws also had an economic side. England's wool industry was a huge part of its economy. By forcing most of the population to wear wool, the government was essentially creating a guaranteed domestic market for one of its biggest exports. So it wasn't just about social snobbery. It was also about protecting local industry. A bit like a Buy English Wool campaign, but with legal penalties if you didn't. What about women? Their clothing was just as regulated. The value of their dresses, the type of trim they could use, and the headdresses they wore were all subject to the law. A knight's wife had a different clothing allowance than a common laborer's wife. It reinforced the social status not just of the woman, but of her husband and family. As time went on, enforcing these laws became harder and harder. The merchant class grew wealthier and more powerful, and the lines between the classes started to blur. By the Tudor era, the sumptuary laws were still on the books, but they were becoming increasingly difficult to enforce. Queen Elizabeth I was a huge fan of them, seeing fashion as a way to control her court, but the tide of history was turning. People with money wanted to show it off, and no law was going to stop them for long. Eventually, the rise of capitalism and a new way of thinking about society made these laws obsolete. The idea that you should be able to wear what you can afford, rather than what your birth dictates, won out. But for several centuries, these laws shaped the look, feel, and social fabric of medieval England. So next time you're getting dressed, take a moment to appreciate the freedom you have. You can wear purple, you can wear velvet, and your shoes can be as pointy or as plain as you want them to be, and you won't get arrested for it. The medieval world of fashion was a complex and controlled place, where every thread told a story of status, power, and ambition. What do you think? Do you have been a rule follower or a fashion rebel in medieval England? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this little trip back in time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more fascinating stories from history. I'll see you next time.